This is yesterday's news, today's history, using historic newspapers for your genealogical research. And we have our speaker today is Randi Ramsden. First, I would just like to thank our sponsors, the Friends of the Appleton Public Library, Wisconsin Historical Society, and Appleton Public Library. For those who don't know me, I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian here at Appleton Public Library, and I'm excited to welcome you to our Find Your Ancestors series. For those who aren't familiar with us, we do this every year, every November to March. Typically we do it in person, but obviously with this year's pandemic, we're doing all of our programs virtual. I have a listing here on the screen. If my slide will advance, there we go. We have programs every month. January, we're going to offer 2 sessions, so hopefully you guys will be able to join us. We have lots of really great speakers lined up this year. Italian genealogy is our next one, December 12th. I'll post links in the chat a few times if you miss them. You can also go to our calendar at apl.org/calendar and find information on the events there, as well as the registration link. And it'll be done on Zoom just like this on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. You can also sign up for our local history and genealogy newsletter that I send out about once a month, sometimes a little less during the off Find Your Ancestors time. But I let you know about lots of great library resources and events that we have coming up. If you need any help navigating any of our library databases or any genealogy type questions that you might have, that you're struggling with a brick wall or you have Appleton area ancestors and you want to learn more, definitely feel free to email me. My email is on the screen. And you can also check out our YouTube channel for past Find Your Ancestors programs, as well as the recording to this one, which we will put up in a few days. I also wanted to let you know about our civic discussion series that we have going on. Every quarter, we do a different topic. Right now, we're doing the election, since it's been a really big election year this year. On November 18th, which is next Wednesday at 6:30, we're going to host a UW-Milwaukee professor to talk about Wisconsin's historic elections and kind of what role Wisconsin played in those elections, as well as talk a little bit about the results of the 2020 election and get some questions answered about what might happen going forward with the recount or changing of power and everything. So again, for details on that, you can check out our calendar or visit our Facebook page. A couple notes about during the presentation. Please keep yourself muted so that everyone can hear our speaker. We do have a handout for today's presentation that was sent out to everybody who registered yesterday. I will post the link in the chat several times throughout our session today, so if you missed it, you can definitely get it downloaded through our chat box. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type into the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. There's a little box that says chat, and if you click on it, then you can just type a message, and we'll try to answer the questions as best as we can at the end. And again, we're recording today's session, so look for the YouTube video on our page in a few days. So now a little bit about our speaker. Randi Ramsden is the National Digital Newspaper Program Manager at the Wisconsin Historical Society, where she oversees the digitization of historic Wisconsin newspapers for the Library of Congress database, Chronicling America. Her article, Shaping Identity, The History of German Language Newspapers in Wisconsin, was published in the fall 2016 issue of Wisconsin Magazine of History. And I would just recommend all of you visit her at the Wisconsin Historical Society. It's a wonderful research area. I've spent many a days there, so I will turn it on over to Randi now.
Great, thank you. This is a big crowd. I'm really excited to talk to you all and that we could make this happen virtually. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I can get started. There we go. Yes, first of all, like Katie said, I work at the Wisconsin Historical Society. We were founded in 1846 and have been collecting the state's history even before statehood, 2 years before, in fact. We have the second largest collection of historic North American newspapers in the country. And that is partially also not only the Wisconsin Historical Society, but we also function as the North American History Library for the UW-Madison campus. So that's why we also collected further than just Wisconsin newspapers. I work with the newspaper collection especially on digitizing some of our newspaper collection. I work for the National Digital Newspaper Program, which is a grant-funded program funded through the NEH. And we receive grants to digitize historic newspapers from Wisconsin to add to the Library of Congress's database, Chronicling America. So far, we have already digitized more than 200,000 pages that are available to be searched for free in that database. But we are currently also working on adding an additional 100,000 pages of local newspapers. So this is just a little bit of an overview of what we're talking about today. I'm going to talk just briefly about just Wisconsin newspapers in general, and then we're going to talk about why newspapers are useful, why do we keep them, why do we have so many of them, and then how can you find a newspaper? How do you even start when you're looking into a town, you're trying to find an ancestor looking at a specific town? How do you know what newspapers were published there? And then we'll go on to what has been digitized, what is online, where can you find it, what can you search there, and then also what's offline, and what can you maybe get through your local library or by visiting us. So here you can see Appleton's first newspaper. The Appleton Crescent was first published in 1853. And it actually ran all the way through 1919. It was the first newspaper, but not the only newspaper in town. Many followed, including some German language newspapers. There were 4 German language newspapers that were published in Appleton, and kind of just showing big German heritage in the area. And they were published in German and also in, as you can see, the German kind of font, Fraktur, because the immigrant community that settled in the area, the German immigrant community, they kind of held on to their language. They continued to speak German a lot of the times, and then also published their own newspaper because that is where they settled. But you can also see that there's a lot of German newspapers, just showing you how diverse even the German immigrant group was. And small towns oftentimes had multiple newspapers showing different points of view, whether it was political or religious, culturally. So that's why it's really interesting, I think, to look at these newspapers. Overall, we can see here that between 1833 and 2004, there were more than 3,600 newspapers that were published in the state of Wisconsin. And you can see it by county. The darker the county, the more newspapers were published here, and the lighter, the fewer titles. But even we can see some smaller counties or with smaller populations had newspapers throughout the history of the state. You take the number of newspapers and then break it down kind of by language and ethnicity. You can see that the majority of the papers published during that time were in English. So between 1833 and 2004, there were mostly English language newspapers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were English, people coming from England who settled here. But that's just means the newspapers didn't identify as specifically Irish if they were printed in English and was maybe an Irish community, but it's just they didn't identify themselves as any ethnic group, and they didn't identify themselves by a different language. So when we take the English language newspapers out of the equation, that's where we can kind of see that the Germans published about 266 newspapers throughout the state, and then the next largest group was the Norwegians, publishing 30 newspapers around the state. And it goes Polish, Czech, Dutch, Swedish. So we have all kinds of languages represented in our newspaper collection. But why is that so interesting? Isn't that just old news? And this is usually what I bring up with students, middle school, high school students, right? Because they don't necessarily have a connection to newspapers anymore. They don't really understand that you used to sit down in the morning and read the paper together, or that's where people would get most of their information. So this is an example, the first newspaper, the Tribune here in New York, published after the sinking of the Titanic. And it has a lot of numbers, right? We can see how many people were on the Titanic, how many people have died, how many people were rescued. We get the statistics, we get a picture of the Titanic, of the captain. We also have a little bit of a map there showing what happened where and with a timeline. So that's all information that when I tell that to students, this is really cool, you can find this here. They say, well, but that's on Wikipedia too, right? Why do I need to look at the newspaper? Well, this may be true for the information we can find in that article, right? The large newspaper in New York, but then we take a step further and we look at our local newspapers. This is the Watertown Weekly Leader, and also the first one published after the sinking of the Titanic. And suddenly we hear about 11 Wisconsinites on the Titanic. We learn who these people were, where they were from, maybe they still had family in Wisconsin. Why were they on the Titanic? So we have this global event that happened, the sinking of the Titanic, and looking at our local newspapers, it suddenly becomes local history. We Wisconsinites were involved in that event. It matters to us. And I like to compare looking at the newspapers almost as like a time capsule. You're able to look at the news as they unfolded for people at the time. So it's not just summarized in a history book or on Wikipedia, but you can really follow how an event was recorded, reported, and get a glimpse at the life that people led and how they received information. This is an example from the Fond du Lac Journal, and you can see here a piece of more local history. Right, we have the masthead from May 31st, 1848. It was published in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin Territory. And then the next issue, published on June 7th, 1848, published in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. So we can really see through the newspaper our state turning from a territory into a state. How did that affect people? What were they thinking? Letters to the editor are always great in those newspapers because people really shared their thoughts, discussed different opinions, and it's just, there's so much information in there. And going even more local, you can see how your town has changed, right? This is from the Wausau Pilot in 1900 when their new opera house was first opened. You can kind of find out what people saw there. And this was a big deal, right? In 1900, opening a grand opera house. This is the place where people went for entertainment. So you can imagine people living there at the time, going there or walking by and seeing this big building. And in the newspaper, we can see here an illustration of what the building looks like. And then we can read how excited people were about it. And then this, even though this is not a picture from yesterday, you can tell by the cars probably, I was assured that this is still the building that is up to date. And then when I look at this picture of the building and look at this illustration, I can see that's not the same building. But I can go into the newspaper and then find out that in 1920, the building was torn down and a new one was built. And so seeing, especially again, when I talk to students, it's fun to have them kind of look at it through the lens of they walk down their hometown streets every day and they see buildings, and now they can see the history of the building through the newspaper. and how excited people might have been, or the opposite, right? Maybe there were some people who really were against the building of the Opera House or the building of the new one when they tore down the original. Also, what we have been doing a lot this year is looking at the news from 1918. So this is from the Black Earth newspaper, talking about how the then oftentimes called the Spanish flu came to town, how people were affected, what health officers were saying, what happened to schools and students, people who were ill would be listed oftentimes in the newspaper. And so we've been looking at that a lot just to get a historical perspective on what has been happening this year, right? People have gone through something similar before, and it's just interesting to take a look at how they have dealt, how information was spread then, and then compare it to how information was spread or is being spread today. Of course, much faster now, right? And we have different types. We don't only have the newspaper. Yeah, and then radio, and of course, internet. And then something else we've been doing, which is a lot of fun, and I can share if it will work, a little video here. We have been finding great recipes in our newspapers. And this year, since we had to work a lot from home, we thought, why not try some of these recipes and share them with our audience. So if you follow us on our Facebook page or on Twitter, you can see that we try out different recipes and then write about it. So there is, for every recipe, there's an article and the recipe so you can try it too on our website. And then sometimes we also make fun videos of our experience. So this was from a German language newspaper, Sonntagsbote from 1910. It's called a swimming island. It is a hard-boiled egg that you roll in sugar and cinnamon, dunk in pancake batter, and then deep fry, and then roll in cinnamon and sugar and pancake batter and deep fry again over and over until you don't have any batter left. And that is the swimming island. It's doused with sweet hot wine at the end. So that's what apparently the Germans ate here as a dessert in 1910. But looking at family history research, right? That's why you're here on genealogy. Newspapers are great because you can find obituaries. And here we have an example from Mineral Point and another Black Earth newspaper. And sometimes it'll be long written out obituaries like this. And this is great, not just to find information about the deceased person, but also family members. Right? Did they have children, or the spouse, or sometimes you don't know who died first or when did they die. So you can find that information in obituaries. Sometimes it's also that it's just going to be a list of people who have died and not a full obituary. So depending on the town and the family, there might just be a mentioning of it, but it could help you kind of narrow down when a person has died. Weddings. This is great. So weddings is always fun if you can find the actual report of a wedding in the newspaper. So sometimes I think this was pretty long, a whole column of a wedding that is described in detail, right? Sometimes you can find descriptions of the flowers and what they were wearing and what was eaten and who was at the party and how long, and if anybody get angry because they party too long at night. That happens a lot, and then yeah, you will find it in the newspaper. So it's really fun to look at the weddings. But also sometimes you can find courthouse notes, and then it'll be who applied for a marriage license, and shorter information like that. So even if you can't find the long description of a wedding, oftentimes you can find little notes like that in the newspaper. And then I like to describe our newspapers are historic newspapers as really the social media of the time. If you think that people are now oversharing their personal life on the internet, look at the newspapers. They shared everything. You could look at a newspaper and see who had whom over for dinner, sometimes what they were eating for dinner, who had friends or family come from out of town, into town to visit, who had left town to go visit, who was on vacation and what they saw on vacation. You can oftentimes find young women from the area going to Chicago and then loving all the museums. So descriptions like that you can find. And it's just a great look into what was happening in town. And yeah, you can see some examples here from the Vernon County Censor, and then here this is from Appleton. And in Appleton, you can see that these are a little longer right now, what is happening. So we can also see Girls Club notes, and there's parties that will be announced there, or who had been at a party, and then evidently also who had missed a party, right? Who might have not been invited. And then going back a little further, this is an example from the Manitowoc Tribune from 1871. You can oftentimes find lists of names. And this means these people all had mail at the post office. So this can sometimes help if you're not exactly sure where a person was located at a certain point of time. Let's say somebody was traveling, and traveling in the 1800s was a little slower, so you would stay places for maybe months on end. But that wouldn't be your residence, right? You're staying with somebody. But people would, if they were gone for a long time, would have their mail oftentimes sent to the place where they were visiting, so they could go there and pick up their mail. So sometimes you can find people there, and you can narrow it down to a town. Where did they have their mail sent while they were gone? And it's sometimes a little easier to narrow down their location that way. Also, a fun thing that you can sometimes see is lists of people who still haven't picked up their mail. So maybe you can find out that your ancestor was lazy and didn't like to go to the post office very often. So in a German language newspaper, I found a note saying, well, if you're not going to pick up your mail, we're going to send it back, that kind of thing. So even though that doesn't give you a lot of information for your family tree, it might just give you a little bit of information to almost get to know your ancestor a little better. Okay, so just in general tips, now that you know that newspapers are great and you can find all kinds of information in them, some general tips that I would suggest for looking in newspapers, doing research in newspapers. Get to know the newspaper. If you know exactly what town you're looking at, and you know that your ancestors were in this town and they stayed in this town, then get to know the local newspaper. Get to know the layout and the columns that the newspaper has. That way it's much easier for you to go through and skim and then find your ancestors, rather than having to read every single line, especially with older newspapers, so the 1800s newspapers, where there's not a lot of headlines that are big, right? It's just columns of text. It can be very tiring for you to look through. So if you know that obituaries are always on page 3, go to page 3 if you're looking for that. If you know that court notes and wedding announcements are always on page 2, you know exactly where to look for them. So that can help at least save you some time in your research. When you're looking at foreign language titles that you don't know, you can't read the language necessarily. Maybe some in German that have the Fraktur and you're not used to reading that type of font. Sit down and maybe write down what your name or the heading, right, the wedding announcements, what it would look like in that font. You can find that online, a lot of times just the alphabet, and then if you write it down in that font, you you have that image of the word that you're looking for. That can oftentimes help. And also the name that you're looking for. If you're looking for a specific last name, look at the spelling of the name in that font, because the way our brains skim text is more through the visuals rather than reading letter by letter. Right, so that could be helpful in that, and also help you save some time. You can always, right, if you don't know the language and you're looking at a foreign language title, you can hire somebody to translate for you, but it's going to be much cheaper if you already found the name and the obituary or wedding announcements with the name in there, and then tell somebody, could you please translate this for me? It's going to be much cheaper than having them go through it and translate the entire newspaper for you. And then you can find it. So that's just another tip here. But where do you start? So, you know, you want to look at a newspaper and you want to get to know the layout and everything, but how do you even know what was published at the time? Well, it's the Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers is very helpful. So the first one was published in 1958 by Donald Ollertz. It has all the Wisconsin newspapers that were published from 1833 through 1957. It is available as a book. Our library still has it. Maybe your local library does have a copy, I'm not sure. But it has also been digitized. So if you just Google Ollertz Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers, you can for free look at the scans and go through. You can even search. So if you put in Appleton, it will come up with the listings for Appleton. But also Jim Hansen has updated this guide. So now we have information from 1833 through 2004, and that lives on our website. So you can go to wisconsinhistory.org/Wisconsin newspapers, and all of these links are also in the handout that Katie shared. So you can go on our website and find it there, and that's also a list of all the newspapers. I would say the original guide is still interesting if you are also looking for information about editors, for example, because the book also lists the editors or proprietors of the newspaper with the listing. So if you are looking for an ancestor and you know they published a newspaper, you might also be able to find them through that. I've helped a gentleman before at a conference who was looking for an ancestor, and he said, well, they always talked about how he was a newspaper publisher, but I've never been able to find him. And so we looked at the book and we opened up the name index in the back, found his name, and then found the listing so we could find the newspaper that his ancestor had published. So if you have any situations like that, you might be able to find that information there. Jim Hansen has not added that information in the new guide, but that's why you can still find the original. We have also put together a guide to our Wisconsin ethnic newspaper collection. The ethnic newspapers are also included in this, so this is all the foreign language newspapers mostly, and then a prison newspaper collection and a Cuban refugee camp newspaper collection. So you can find guides here too. Ethnic newspaper collection is might be interesting if you're looking specifically only for the German language newspaper. So we've taken here all the newspapers that are in the guide and then listed them by the ethnicity or language and then by location after that. So if you're going that route, you might be able to find it there faster. So this is what our website looks like when you go to wisconsinhistory.org/Wisconsin newspapers. And then you click on the newspaper research guide here. That's what that looks like. And then you just scroll down. And on the left-hand side, you can find all the guides here. And then you can click on them and you can download them. So it's a PDF that you can just live on your computer then. This is what the Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers kind of looks like. So it's listing by county and then by town and then all the titles. So here's Adams County, and then the first town there is Adams, and then all the newspaper titles that have been published there. So this Adams County Herald was published in 1913. Adams County Times was published 1914 through 2004 and on. And you can find more information here that the title varied. So 1914 through 1922, it was called the Adams Advertiser. 1923 through 1929 was the Adams Times, and then it turned into the Adams County Times after that. This means that WHI means that we, in fact, have collected that newspaper and it is available at the Wisconsin Historical Society. And these are the dates that are available at our library. Most of them on microfilm, but you could, if you wanted to take a look at that microfilm, either come visit us. Even right now, you can make an appointment to come into our library. But if you're not able to come to Madison, you can also talk to your local public library, and we do interlibrary loan. So we can send out reels of microfilm, and then you can view them at your local library if your local library doesn't have those reels yet. Oftentimes local libraries will keep their local newspapers and available at the library. If you're looking for a different town, that's a different story. Okay. And then you can see, like, you could ask, what is online, right? What can you access from home so you don't have to go into the library, especially right now? You might not be comfortable going to the library and looking at the microphone. So we can take a look at what is available online. We have put together on our website, again, that's wisconsinhistory.org/Wisconsin newspapers, we've put together this interactive map. And I'm gonna try and see. Are you able to see that? So this is on our website. You just scroll down, and then you have this map of digitized Wisconsin newspapers. And of course, now it's refreshing. There we go. This is a map of all the newspapers that have been digitized either by us, or also I noticed in the comments earlier, people talked about newspapers.com. So all of the newspapers available that we're aware of that are available online, you can find on this map. You can filter it by county. So if you want to pick a specific county, you just take and check the all and then pick your specific county. You can also do that with city. You can also start typing in the title of a newspaper that you're looking for. You can even narrow it down kind of by timeline. So if you're looking for newspapers in the 1800s, you could just hit that and then it will refresh. And these are the newspapers that are available from the 1800s. Go back to all. Down here, at the bottom, it will also, because there's not much information when you just look at the dots, right? But down here is a list of all of those dots that you can see. So once you filter them down, this list will also get shorter, and then you can find some more information about that. But you can also just hover over one of those dots and find the information. So this is a newer newspaper, so the Wittenberg Enterprise and Burnham Wood News. And you can see the date range that's available, 2005 and to current, so not too interesting for our genealogy research. But you can see the source, Archive of Wisconsin Newspapers, and then if it's free to access. So Badger Link for Wisconsin residents is free to access. So if you're within the state, you can go on there and take a look at these newspapers. Let's maybe find a more historic one. There we go. So this is from the Algoma Public Library. They digitized this newspaper. The years that are available online are 1873 through 1897. And it is free to access on because it was digitized by the public library. And then when you click on it, and you can also find the link. So, oh, this is a different, sorry about that. Was this the one we looked at? Yes. So then you can find the link here. You can click on it and we'll take you straight to the website. So you can take a look at those newspapers. You can see this, for example, is the Dodgeville Chronicle. We digitized that for Chronicling America. And again, it's free to access. You can see the years that are available online, and then also get the link when you click on it right there. Okay, so this is our interactive map. This is just, we try to create a one-stop shop for you when you want to see what is available online. That's because there are so many different databases, right? Some newspapers have been digitized by the local public library. Some have been digitized by museums or smaller groups that were interested in digitizing their local paper. So we're trying to gather all the information so we know exactly what is out there, and then we will lead you there. Some are behind a paywall, so newspapers.com is one, or Newspaper Archive is another one, where you have to pay for a subscription or contact your local library and see if they have a subscription to it and if you can use it that way. That way you don't have to pay for it yourself. Okay, go back to this. So this is the Archives of Wisconsin Newspapers. It's just one example. They have mostly current newspapers that are available digital, but they do have some historic. So when you go on their website, you are able to search the historic newspapers. And again, it is free for Wisconsin residents to go on and explore this database. I know we have some people who are from out of state, so I'm sorry, I didn't anticipate that, but there's other resources, and you can still use the map. This is this kind of hosted by the WILS and the WNA, the Wisconsin Newspaper Association. And this is what the search looks like. So you can put in search terms, you can narrow down the dates, you can see all the historic newspapers here and see if you want to just search in one particular newspaper or all of them. And they even, and I haven't grabbed a new screenshot, I should have done that, but I think when you go on the website now, you can also click on a video that explains more search functions within there, so you can kind of get some more tips of how you can search this database best way, make it the most efficient for you. And then there's Chronicling America. So this is the database that I work for, that we add newspapers to for our grant program. So the first grant we received in 2015. It's always 2 years that we have to digitize 100,000 pages. In the first 2 years, we were able to digitize 110,000 pages of historic newspapers, and it's the kind of the counties that are marked red. Those are the ones that we focused on during the first grant cycle. We have an advisory committee, consists of librarians, historians, newspaper professionals from across the state, and they decide which newspapers we should focus on for a grant cycle. What they think represents certain aspects of history, and then we digitize those newspapers. So in the first grant cycle, you can see here, in red, they focused on long spans of time. So they wanted newspapers that were published for a very long time, predating statehood and on. So there was, for example, the Mineral Point newspapers were digitized for during this round because they thought it was very important that we capture that mining history and the early statehood history. But they also wanted, as you can see in the map here, some geographic coverage. So it's very much from all over the state. The second grant cycle, our advisory committee decided to focus on some newspapers kind of between 1900 and 1922. They wanted to capture a lot of the, well, World War I, but also the progressive era. in our state and how that was seen in different areas in the state. When you go to Chronicling America, which is at chroniclingamerica.loc.gov, and this again is a free database hosted by the Library of Congress, this is what it will look like. So at first, the landing page, you can kind of see some newspapers here. We're one of, I believe now, 49 states participating in this program. So there's newspapers from all over the country, including Puerto Rico, and I think the Virgin Islands just joined, so they're going to be adding some newspapers as well. So if you even have ancestors from outside of Wisconsin and you want to look in newspapers for them, you can browse here and browse by state, different states, if you know where they were located. So when you're on here, you will click on the advanced search right up here. And this is what the search looks like. So here again, you can select by state. Wisconsin is now not the last one anymore because Wyoming just joined. So second to last on the list there. You can also search or select a specific newspaper. If you know which one from Wisconsin on here you want to look for, you can narrow it down right here. You can go by years. So if you're looking for just general information, or you don't have specific information, you don't have a specific event you're looking for, you can just plug in some year ranges here, or you can go very specific. So for example, that Titanic coverage in the local newspaper, the Watertown newspaper, I searched here usually from the event, when the event happened, and then I give the newspaper about 2 weeks to kind of cover those stories, because news traveled much slower back in the day. You can also limit your search, so you can search only front pages. For a genealogy, that is not usually what you want to do, but you can narrow it down to a specific page. So kind of like I have mentioned before, if you are, if you're getting to know the newspaper and you know obituaries are always on page 3, and I'm only interested in obituaries, you can put in page 3 right there. You can also narrow down by language. So if you're only looking for German language newspapers, you can plug in German there. And this is where you can put your search words. I think I have an example here. Yes. So this first field is great because it is searching with any of these words. So this is great for different spellings. Right, when you look at last names were either oftentimes misspelled or they changed. The spelling of the last name would change. And here we have the example of Schmidt. Last name Schmidt could maybe also have been spelled with an IE, or could have been spelled with DT or double T. So if you're not sure, you can plug all of these in there and it will come up with any pages who contain either of those. So that's a great search function for that. And then you're looking for obituaries. So you put in obituaries in this field because it definitely, you're telling the database, you only want to see newspaper pages where this word definitely appears, and then either of those also appears. You can also search for phrases. So if you wanted to search for the Great War, about after World War I, then you could plug that in here, because then it wouldn't show you all kinds of, if you put it in here, it would search for great and war. So you would come up with a lot of hits, right? Because it's either of those words. If you put them in here, you would come up with a lot of hits because you can probably find a lot of pages where there's one article mentioning a war and some advertisement talking about how great something is. So since you don't want to eliminate those, you could plug it into phrase and then really find only where Great War is spelled out just like that. And then the last one, this is my favorite here, I think. So this is when I search for the different spellings of Schmidt and the obituary. This is what I get. So it will show me all the pages, thumbnails of all the pages that contain either the spellings of Schmidt and obituary. And you can see that it's the it marks in red where it finds those words. And then when I click on it, then I can zoom in and see the whole page. And I can see here an obituary of a Schmidt. If I want to keep this for my records, I can download it as a PDF and just keep it on my computer. You can also then print it out. It's not the greatest to print out because newspapers are much larger than our letter size papers, right? So, but you could zoom in and grab a piece and just print out that specific article that you're interested in. But also when you are downloading it as a PDF, it also has the text, so the way it searches these words, it has the text layered underneath. So even when you open the PDF document and you're not sure anymore where exactly on the page you found the name and you don't want to read through all of it, you can, again, hit Control F and search in your PDF document because the information is still there. Okay, here I have an example of the proximity search. So I'm not originally from Wisconsin, but my husband is, and I know his family is from the Highland area. So I know Mineral Point newspapers would have probably included some of the Highland news at the time. So I selected these and I kind of left it up all years. I didn't really care about a year. I just wanted to see if I could find some Ramsdens in the Highland news. And then the proximity search lets me search 2 words close to each other. And you can here select within 50 words of each other or even 5 or 10 words of each other. So this is great if you are looking for names. And even you might have a full name, but there's different ways a name could be listed in the newspaper, right? There is, you could have, I don't know, we could have Bob LaFollette. He would be in the newspaper a lot, right? But let's just say it's just your everyday Bob LaFollette. You're looking for him. So he could be listed as Bob LaFollette, but he could also be listed as LaFollette Bob or LaFollette, comma, Bob, and middle initial, or the middle initial would be somewhere else. And so since you don't know which way the name would have been formatted in the newspaper, it doesn't make much sense to look into the phrases, right? Because the phrase would only look for the spelling exactly how you put it in here. Here you could put Bob LaFollette within 5 words of each other, and it would show up all of these variants. So no matter how the name is printed in the newspaper. So I put the Highland because that's where my husband's family is from, in Ramsden, and hit search and found a report from Highland that somebody was, or that the smallpox were actually spreading in town. And one of the people who had them was James Ramsden Jr., the assistant postmaster. I have not yet confirmed with my in-laws if they are related to this James Ramsden Jr. But if they were, they could find out right here that he had the smallpox and that people kept visiting him. And then they would go out and visit other people throughout town, and people were scared that the smallpox would spread through the entire town. So also maybe a little bit of interesting family history if it happens to be a family. But also, aside from that, it would be interesting because he's the assistant postmaster. And you can, sometimes find people listed like that. Okay, so this is what is kind of online and how you can search for that in Chronicling America, and then there's other databases. There are somewhat similar in how you can search them. So you kind of have to look into them. I just can't cover all of them, really. So if there is anything you're looking for and it hasn't been digitized, which is frankly the majority of the newspapers that we have collected that have been published in Wisconsin history. And we have digitized the tip of the iceberg. We are constantly digitizing, but it will take a long time to get everything online. So what can you do if you're looking for a newspaper And you have, maybe you looked at the Olert's guide, you know exactly what newspaper you're looking for, but it is not available online. You can find it offline by just starting at your local library. If it is a local newspaper, they might even have it either on microfilm, maybe they have some paper copies, so you can take a look at that. Use the Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers to identify exactly what newspaper you're looking for. And then also in there, you can find the information if we have collected it at the Historical Society. And then if we have, then it is most likely on microfilm. You can take a look at our catalog. This is the link to our catalog. And then, yes, like I said before, we do interlibrary loan, we offer that. So if you are interested in having a reel of microfilm sent to your public library, you can do that. And then also you can come visit us. We're always happy to welcome you to our reading room. Right now, as I said, by appointment only, because we're trying to keep on top of the numbers of people coming in. But on a regular day without a pandemic, you could just walk into our building, walk into the reading room, talk to the librarians there, or walk into our room with all the microfilm if you know exactly what you're looking for, and grab it and sit down at one of the microfilm readers or scanners and do your research that way. If you're still not sure where to start, I know I shared a lot of information and I get very excited about newspapers, so I know I tend to talk really fast when it comes to that. But all the information I shared, you can also find in our research guide. So if you go to wisconsinhistory.org/Wisconsin newspapers and then hit onto the research guide, there's everything kind of spelled out. It walks you through it again. And then also in the handout, I definitely included my email in there. So feel free to contact me if you're looking for a newspaper and you just don't know how to get it, or what there might even be. You're struggling with all of this, let me know and I can help. And I mean, I have some more stories I can share, but I think we can open up for questions. If anybody has any questions for me, I also have the guide to Wisconsin newspapers on my computer. So if you're looking for anything specific, I have more questions, we can go through that.
Well, thank you, Randi, for your wonderful presentation. We did have a couple of questions throughout chat that I can have you address. The one that was recently answered is, how can we influence which newspapers get digitized? Is there like a way we can contribute monetarily to digitize specific newspapers, or is it up to your committee?
So for Chronicling America, it is up to the committee. I don't really have a say in it either. But there are other options. So if you would want them to be included in the archive of Wisconsin newspapers, I can get you in touch with, it's Emily Fotenhauer at Wills. She works with local public libraries to digitize their newspapers and get them online. And then there's also different options. If your library wants to digitize newspapers, they could even have it on their own website. But it's always about how those files are also hosted, so you can actually search them online. So sometimes that's a little bit more complicated, but just contact me and I can put you in touch with the people who can help you there.
Yeah, and I know for the library, like we subscribe to the newspapers.com library subscription, and we also have Newspaper Archive, which is another database, and we have no control over the coverage of our local newspaper that's on there. I mean, we have it all on microfilm at the library, of course, but there's spotty coverage on both of those databases. And unfortunately, no matter how much you ask, they still say, oh, you're on the list to be added, you're on the list to be added. And yeah, so just keep checking back. But of course, always check with your local library or the library where you're researching. Somebody also asked, when you do a search on Chronicling America, how do you know where in the newspaper the term is used? Is it highlighted?
Yes, so it, let me see if I can go back to, So this is an, so I zoomed in, right? But you can kind of see here. So this would be a page, how it's shown to you. And then in red, you can see the search terms I put in. And even when you look at the thumbnails, it will show you right there. So that way you can, even by looking at these smaller images, the thumbnails, you can even sometimes determine if that's something you're interested in, right? Sometimes you can see a headline and it will talk about something that you're not interested in because you're like, oh, I'm just looking for obituaries. Then you can skip that one without having to zoom in.
And someone asked about African American newspapers. Where are they indexed, or how can you access them?
Yes, so they are part of the Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers, and we have them included in the Ethnic Newspaper Guide. So there is a section for African American and Black newspapers, and then you can find them all listed there. We did collect a lot of them, but not all of them. I have to say that I think our librarians throughout the time really tried hard to track a lot of them down, but we don't have all of them. But we also don't have all the newspapers. We did digitize the Weekly Blade, which is an African American newspaper from Madison. So if you're interested in that area, that is in Chronicling America already. But other than that, I would go through the Guide of Wisconsin Newspapers, locate the newspaper you're interested in, go from there to see. Some things, I think Milwaukee newspapers, some have been digitized, and those you would then find through our map.
And one other thing I want to point out too is on Chronicling America, if you want to show it, Randy, they do have a newspaper directory. So no matter where you're researching, if it's Wisconsin or if it's somewhere else in the United States, there's a directory where you can find out like what newspapers were made and what time, and then see what holdings there are, like if the Wisconsin Historical Society has it, or if you're not in Wisconsin, if there's a local library that would have it, or some other national library, how you would locate it.
Yeah. Yes, and actually this directory for Wisconsin is based on the original Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers. I will say it can be sometimes a little bit confusing because newspapers change their titles quite often. Right, sometimes even dropping a name in between or dropping the hyphen or something, which will in this newspaper directory oftentimes make them a new entry. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes, which newspaper am I really looking at? What is great though is when you look at a newspaper in here, it will also show you which newspaper preceded and succeeded that newspaper. So you can click around. I sometimes, when I get confused by the newspaper directory, I go back to the Guide to Wisconsin Newspapers, because there you will have one title and then all the different titles it had throughout. That just makes it a little less confusing sometimes. But yes, you can search here, and you can search by language. You can search ethnic newspapers, and that's really for the entire country, but you can narrow it down to state and county and cities. And yeah, that way you would find African American newspapers.
Yeah, and Antoinette, the librarian at our local academic library, suggested there's a database called African American Newspapers that a local library or academic library might subscribe to. So you might want to check that out as well.
Yes, that's definitely a good one too. Yeah. Also, sometimes it depends on newspapers, and it just goes in general. So Native American newspapers oftentimes too, where they're not, some titles are not technically considered newspapers, but more pamphlets. Right, so a maybe a Native American reservation published a newsletter or a pamphlet where there were a lot of news about the community included, but it might not show up as a newspaper. But that way, contact one of our librarians and see if they can help you find and narrow down your search.
All right, another question we had is, would Jewish newspapers be in the ethnic collection, German speaking?
I don't think we have any German language Jewish papers. We do have some Yiddish papers, I believe, and some English language Jewish papers.
And then another question was, I think specifically about the Wisconsin Badger Link stuff. As an outside of Wisconsin resident, how do you get access to those Wisconsin papers?
I'm not sure if there is a way, honestly. Through that portal. I'm not sure. I have actually never gone on it when I was outside of the state. But if you're having trouble, just shoot me an email and I can find out for you.
Yeah, my other suggestion is definitely contact a library in that area that you're researching. There's also lots of Facebook groups on Wisconsin genealogy where you can post, hey, I'm looking for this issue or this person in a specific newspaper, and people are so friendly. They will look it up for you, help you out if they live in Wisconsin. I know I always help people looking up stuff on newspaper.com because I have a subscription myself, and I love to help people. So definitely ask for a friend or a favor. We also had a question about copyright restrictions on digitizing newspapers.
Yes, that's a big topic. So anything, I think right now it is anything 1924 and older is in the public domain. Anything published after, between like 1925 and then 1925 will be added to the public domain at the end of this year, so for next year. Anything after through 1963 may be in the public domain. So it depends on if the newspaper renewed their copyright, and then also for some of the content, right, syndicated content especially, comic strips, even recipes or those novels, serialized novels that would be in the newspaper. That depends on if the copyright was filed for that again, renewed for that kind of content. So digitizing digitizing and then making it accessible online depends on if it's in the public domain, because there could be a large newspaper publisher who owns that copyright and could say, well, you have to take that down, that belongs to us, if it isn't in the public domain. So what we do, what the Library of Congress does, or we have to show that we're doing this research in order to put anything in Chronicling America, is that we have to do a lot of research. We look into the newspaper, see if they renewed their copyright, and then look at the content and how much we kind of weigh the odds there. Is anybody going to come after us if we digitize it?
Kathy had asked about our February webinar that's coming up. I had mentioned earlier that it's going to be about deciphering foreign language documents. I'm not quite sure if she's going to talk about German newspapers, but she definitely might. I know she's a German translator pretty much, so you can bet that she's definitely going to talk about German stuff. So definitely encourage you to attend February's program if you're reading a lot of foreign language newspapers or have foreign language documents in your family. She's a great speaker, so I highly recommend her.
Yeah, I also saw a comment earlier, kind of along those lines with a look, they put in a name, I think searching for a name, and it didn't really come up. So the way we digitize the newspapers is that we run it through so once we have the digital images, we run them through a program, which is called OCR, Optical Character Recognition. And so it's the computer trying to decipher every letter that is printed on that page. And then it creates a document, so that is then searchable. So when you put in a search word, and especially with those German fonts, which are a little, even for us, a little harder to read, right? The computer oftentimes does not really know what to do with some of these S's and F's and just different fonts. So it is not 100% accurate. So you will oftentimes find something that is off. That's the best that the computer can do. But I would, especially with the foreign language, if you're looking for a specific name, it still makes sense to browse, right? It's great to have these newspapers online and have them searchable, but it's still great to just browse around and maybe find something that way too.
Is there a way to do an exact phrase search? Like, could you use quotation marks to do an exact search?
For the phrase, you can use that search option, the phrase, and then you can put it in, and that should search for it.
But I know some databases like newspapers.com or Newspaper Archive, it really depends on the database. So definitely kind of learn a little bit more about the database and what their search techniques are on that database.
The Archive of Wisconsin Newspapers, the Badgerlink WNA one, that also works with the quotation. But I think when you're on that search engine, when you can look at it, they also have some tips and tricks, and you can click on it, and then it kind of explains to you what you could do to make it. Because you can also, I think, do a proximity search or any of those words, right? Either spelling. You just have to kind of read about it, how you put that in their search bar there.
Do you need volunteers to help with digitizing?
Right now, we don't, but that's something you can see if you can volunteer for that at your local library, if they have any digitization projects going on.
Yeah, like we have an obituary index at the Appleton Public Library. We're always having volunteers come in and look up obituaries and pull the relevant information for us, and then we add it to our index. And lots of people access that index all the time. And then Bill made a comment that you can access the Badgerlink stuff from out of state if you have a Wisconsin library card.
That's, yeah. And that way you can log it through your public library. Yes.
And then somebody wanted you to repeat how you got to the map. What page? I think she's talking about the Wisconsin map with the different colored circles.
Let's see. Yeah. So it's just wisconsinhistory.org/Wisconsin newspapers. And then you scroll down and you're right there. And also you're doing, is your next presentation on Italian?
Yes.
Yeah, we digitized an Italian language newspaper from Hurley. So maybe that's interesting for some people who are also looking into that. Yeah, and we worked with somebody at the university who could actually read Italian to help us get more information about the newspaper and what it would feature. Because all the newspapers we put into Chronicling America, we also add a little bit of like a small essay about the newspaper and with interesting facts. So we work with somebody who actually could read the language.
Wow, that's great. All right, our next question. I searched a surname in Wisconsin newspapers in Chronicling America, and two papers appeared, both in German. The word highlighted is labor and a word in German, but neither are the search term that she used. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's what I was referring to earlier, that some of the OCR is just not 100% accurate. So you might try different spellings of the name, but yeah, sometimes it's just browsing, back to browsing.
And then could you show us again, how did you get to the advanced search page on the Library of Congress Chronicling America site?
This, yeah, so this is where you go on first, and then it's right up here, advanced search.
All right, someone is trying to search the Wisconsin Staatszuitring, a German paper in Madison, which I'm probably just mispronounced, I apologize. I only have the date ranges looking for possible obituaries. Will I have to wait until the Wisconsin Historical Society Library opens up to view it? They have it on microfilm only.
Yes, so well, you could make an appointment if you wanted to come in. Make an appointment, just contact our library and make an appointment so you could come in and use our microfilm. We are open. It's just that we can only let a certain number of people in every day. But if you want to make the trip, I don't know if you are in Appleton. Do you have a microfilm reader in your library?
Yes.
Yes. So you could have, if the newspaper you're looking for is on microfilm, you could have the microfilm sent to the library and look at it there. If you're at a different, I don't know if you were in Appleton, but otherwise contact your local library and see if they have a reader that you could use.
Yeah, and it also depends on if the libraries are open.
What was that?
It also depends on if the libraries are open. Like right now, we're not open to the public. We're just doing curbside pickup. But if there's any way we could help people look up things, we definitely take reference questions still and still are working actively to help.
Yeah, we do have a service where you can pay for somebody to take a look at the newspaper and then scan those pages for you. And if you're interested in that, you can also email me and I can put you in touch with people or show you the website where you can put in a request.
And then a question we got earlier was about researching Civil War ancestors in the newspaper. She said, some cities were Democrat and some were Republican. So would there be more about the status of deaths for Union soldiers in a Republican-leaning paper or the Democratic-leaning paper? Or any other tips on researching Civil War ancestors in the newspaper?
I'm not sure. I would say if somebody local, a local man who was a soldier in the war died, it is probably covered by both newspapers in the town. I can't vouch for that, but that's what I would think. I'm not sure if the political leaning, the reporting of it might be different, right? But I think you could probably find the name in either newspaper. Civil War researching tricks. I'm not sure. I mean, there's right when people enlisted or when there was a draft, and this also goes for World War I, that oftentimes the local newspaper would publish a list of men who would leave. They would also sometimes list women who would serve as nurses or anybody who was involved in the war effort. I think a lot of the newspapers had lots of these lists, so you might be able to find that. I don't know if I have any specific tricks for researching the Civil War.
I will mention that our March speaker is Russ Horton from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. He's going to talk about researching World War II ancestors, but I can bet you he can also answer Civil War questions. So either seek him out at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum or hold on till March when we're going to talk about the military ancestors. Our next question is just a clarification on the interlibrary loan of newspaper microfilms. Is it only to Wisconsin libraries or is it out-of-state libraries as well?
We also do out-of-state libraries. I think it depends on your library, what system they're under. So check with your local library. Oftentimes, if you can't do it at the public library, maybe you have a university library that's close. Because I know I have gotten microfilm from all over the country to do some research, shipped to our library, and then I could do the research.
And I will plug, again, the Wisconsin Historical Society Library is awesome. They don't just have Wisconsin newspapers microfilmed, they have microfilm from all over the country that I have been able to do my genealogy for other ancestors living outside of state, just right in Madison. So definitely check out their holdings on their catalog and make an appointment and definitely get there if you can. We had a question earlier about older newspaper articles. Would you agree that older newspaper articles on births, deaths, accidents, crimes, etc., were way more descriptive with many details and far less interested in the privacy issues than there are today?
Definitely. I think part of it is also they couldn't turn on their TV, like readers of the newspaper couldn't turn on their TV and watch Law and Order, where they could have that fictionalized and right. So newspapers were also part entertainment. So the gruesome details, which now sometimes, especially looking at it with students, just horrifying. But also very, very interesting. Yeah, I don't think there was any privacy issues that they were worried about. But it also, yeah, get to some interesting, information sometimes about your family, or can get you information about your family.
Yeah, there was just a comment in the chat about there was a listing of all the people who were admitted to the hospital. I've seen that in a lot of newspapers as well. So they didn't have HIPAA laws back then.
Yeah. Definitely not. Also, I mean, calling people out, right, for not paying their newspaper subscription. So things like that are just, yeah. We once found in our newspapers somebody threatening, I think a newspaper editor threatened their readers, if they didn't pay for the newspaper subscription, that he would start printing that they died. He would just, so everybody would, yeah, think they were dead. So it's very entertaining, some of the things you can find there.
And then we had a question earlier about the prison newspaper collection. Does it include any information about prisoner of war camps during World War II era?
Yes. There are also, yeah, there's POW. Oftentimes they're more like newsletters, but yeah, you can find those in the collection too, as well as, yeah, kind of, I said the Cuban refugee camps that were set up in Wisconsin. So lots of those. Oftentimes, with especially modern prison newspapers, it's newspapers written by the inmates. So that's really interesting. You know, it was prison life. Sometimes some might be for other inmates, right, for distribution within. Some might also be for the outside, where families would receive them. So there's all kinds of variants there.
All right, well, I think those were all the questions that I caught, unless anybody has any last minute ones that I might have missed. There were lots of great comments about how great this presentation was and thanking you for your time. Everybody give a wonderful round of applause for Randi and her wonderful information on newspapers. Again, I'd love to just plug, check your local library for what databases they have available. Check libraries around where you live, because one library might have subscribed to it, but a library, 20 minutes or an hour away from you might subscribe to it, and you can easily get a library card for them, as well as your own local library and access their electronic resources. And definitely check the libraries where your ancestors lived, because you never know what kind of awesome local history and newspaper type information they have on their website freely available to you. So thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you learned a lot. I know I did.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great.
Well, and look forward to the recording then in a few days on YouTube, and be sure to sign up for our future Find Your Ancestors program. Again, we are tackling Italian genealogy on December 12th at 2 p.m. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your weekend.